Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our COVID-19 online retail scheme webinar. And thanks for bearing with us. We had some technical difficulties here that we were just running through this morning. So my name is Ross O'Coleman, and as the Enterprise Ireland manager responsible for retail and consumer sectors, I'm delighted that so many of our retailers have been able to join us here this morning. This webinar is a great opportunity for you to understand more details about the scheme, including its objectives, its main features, and very importantly, the applications process. We will run a questions and answers process at the end of the webinar, so please do participate in that and stay until the end to answer any questions that you may have. Ultimately, what we're hoping that you get out of this session is an understanding of whether this scheme is a fit for you and your business, and if so, that you are well prepared to start an application. Now, if during the webinar you're beginning to think that this scheme is perhaps too advanced for where you are at on your online journey, there is the online trading voucher that the local enterprise offices run that may be more appropriate, and I'd encourage you to investigate that. So we ran a version of this scheme earlier on this year and it was highly successful. There was 185 successful companies. The level of the interest in that scheme, of course, does speak to the challenges that the retail sector is currently facing. And I think it's important for us to note that we are conscious of those challenges, that it is a difficult time for many businesses. And through this scheme and many other initiatives, we want to work with you to alleviate as much of that burden as we possibly can. Before I introduce our team and our main presenter, I'd like to say EI runs this scheme on behalf of our parent department, and I'd like to particularly note our colleagues there, Deborah Dignam and Céline McHugh in the Department of Enterprise Business and Innovation, whom we work closely with. There are also a number of business and trade associations who are supporting this scheme, and I'd have to say from my engagement with those organisations so far, they are excellent advocates for their members. Before I hand over, there's a couple of other housekeeping items that I'd just like to reiterate. The scheme is open now until September 28th. The webinar will be recorded and it will be put on our website. Further questions can come into the mailbox retail@enterprise-ireland.com. Finally, if you are making an application, please don't wait till the last minute to get it in. Technical glitches can happen on the day, and we'd encourage you to get them in as early as possible. So now at this point, what I'd like to do is introduce you to the wider online retail scheme. So I'm going to ask my colleagues to turn on their cameras. Okay, so first up I can see Owen O'Brien, and Owen might give us a wave to introduce himself.
Hi, good morning everybody.
We have Mary Cloak there.
Good morning everybody.
Excellent. And I know Amy Robinson is, there's Amy popping up. Amy is our main face behind that retail@enterprise-ireland.com mailbox. So at this point, I want to hand over to Tracy Price. So Tracy is our online retail scheme project manager and our main speaker today. The rest of us are going to leave you in her capable hands, and we will see you again at the questions and answers part of the webinar. Thanks very much, guys.
Thank you, Ross. And I'd just like to say good morning, everybody. Delighted you could take time out of your busy schedule to join us here this morning. Thanks to Ross for the introduction and overview of this scheme, which is designed, as he said, to achieve a step change in your online capability. Given what we have learned in Enterprise Ireland from administering the previous scheme, we feel this information session is worthwhile to ensure three things for you: that you understand the process of applying for this grant, that you minimize time-consuming errors that might occur, and three, that you maximize your potential to secure funding. As Ross pointed out, we experienced very high demand in the last call, and we want you to avoid unnecessary pitfalls and ensure your application gives you the best chance of succeeding in what is a highly competitive environment for these finite funds. So I'll take about 20 minutes or so today to give you some information on the new scheme, and then, as he said, we'll get to Q&A. Conscious that some of you listening are already familiar with the scheme, So please bear with the initial details, which you may know already. And if you have specific queries that you want to send to us via the questions box, we will get through as many as possible. However, given the time constraints, we will have to prioritize the queries that benefit the majority of our listeners today. So if you have a query that's very specific to you that isn't answered here today or isn't on the scheme details on the Enterprise Ireland website, can you please email us via the online retail mailbox listed on the site, which is www.enterpriseireland.com/retail, and we will get back to you as quickly as we can. So let me get on with it. Just moving on to the second slide here. Now, what you can expect to hear from me today is an introduction to the scheme, including the objectives. Then I take you through the application process, which uses an online application system. Then I'll give you some details about key areas that your application should cover, followed by the important details of what costs are eligible for support, and as importantly, what costs we cannot cover. I'll then take you through the evaluation process and some key learnings that we have from previous calls. Now, so this scheme responds, as Ross said, to a need identified by the Department of Business, Enterprise and Innovation to develop Irish retailers' online capability in order to sustain the sector through the current crisis. The scheme was designed to achieve a step change in your existing online capability, and that's a really important overview. The total fund for the call is 5.5 million, and we're hoping to fund around 155 of the strongest proposals. And the last bullet point says there, by supporting retailers, we hope that the sector will develop a more competitive online offer, which helps to compete domestically and help your ambition, more importantly, to compete internationally. So the main features of the scheme. As I said previously, this is a competitive call with funding of up to €40,000, that being 80% of expenditure up to 50,000. Costs cover two main areas. Firstly, the grant will cover 80% of the costs of the fees of an external service provider who will help you develop your digital strategy. And secondly, 80% of the salary costs of an internal project champion. In terms of eligibility, and I'll touch on that again later, you should be an Irish-owned retailer who employed more than 10 people on the 29th of February 2020. You must have an existing online presence. This can be a website, Facebook page, Instagram, other social media. You should show an ambition in the application to export in the future. Your application should show a minimum expenditure of €12,500, and using this figure, we would then give you a €10,000 grant. And up to 50% of that can include salary costs of your internal champion. An FAQ document, which I will upload to our website after this webinar, will detail expenditure and corresponding grant examples. There are also some exclusions regarding franchisees, hotels, restaurants, and other activities such as gaming, tobacco products, cannabis products. The full list of exclusions should be found on our website, and you'll also be made aware of this list on the application process. Now, so how do you apply for this grant? This is just a screen grab of what you will see. I'm not asking you to look into this right now. I know it's very busy. It's just, this is a view of Enterprise Ireland's online application system, and you'll find the link on the Enterprise Ireland online retail webpage. Firstly, you need to register with EI's online application system, giving your name and contact details, and then an email will be sent to you to set a password and enable login. You must complete the registration process within 72 hours. I'm just going to list out on the next slide the eligibility criteria that you will see when you're registering. And I appreciate this slide is too busy for you to read just now. It's just to let you know that the first thing you'll be asked before you progress to the application is to confirm these eligibility criteria. It's important to note that it's up to companies themselves to check and have read the eligibility criteria, as when you go into the application process, you will be asked to declare this. And if you answer negatively to any of them, you won't be allowed to progress, as clearly you're not eligible. We strongly advise that you don't continue if you're not eligible, because we do check. And once again, I just must state that your application will be deemed ineligible and you will have wasted time on an application that will not progress. If you're in any doubt as to where you fit on any of the criteria, we would ask that you email in your query and we'll get back to you as quickly as we can. Once you get your login details, this slide just shows you the system, and it's a similar screen to this that will appear, giving you the option to start an application for the online retail scheme. You'll take the option in the orange box on the right-hand side to make a new application. And the application you'll be applying for is COVID-19 online retail scheme. The first question you're asked is whether you are a client of any of the development agencies. If you are not an existing client, it's really important here that you click none, as if you mistakenly say you are a client of Enterprise Ireland, your application will automatically be deemed ineligible, as existing clients of EI are not eligible for this scheme and are asked to speak to their development advisor regarding suitable supports. So just to reiterate, Enterprise Ireland is managing this COVID scheme on behalf of the government, and you, the retailers, are not and will not become a client of Enterprise Ireland. So when asked if you're a client or if you have an existing relationship with EI, you should state no, or your application will be deemed ineligible. Now, to get on to some more interesting parts, the key areas to cover in your application. We're looking for a well thought out project plan, one that makes sense for your business. So when you're writing your application, please assume we don't know you or your business. And please tell us about your current online position, web presence, who your market is, your target market is, what internal skills you have or need, if you're working with an agency at the moment. Things like, what are your aims and objective of the project? What are you trying to achieve, improve? You'll also need to demonstrate and justify the need for funding, why this funding is necessary. Some reasons may be, are you losing customers to competitors online? Are you trying to diversify into a niche area or a new market? What impact do you hope this will have on your business in terms of, for example, sales, skills, finances? What resources do you have? Do you have an online manager or an external service provider already? And what difference will this grant make to your business? You'll need to give us details of your service provider whose services are an integral requirement of any proposal, as the focus of this scheme is to bring in outside capabilities and extra functionality that you don't already have in the business. Now is the time to engage with these service providers, and to be fair, the earlier you contact them, the better developed plan you will produce in your application. Finally, make sure you give us a good breakdown of costs, task/activity, number of days, daily rate, etc. And I suppose overall, I'd like to get across the message that we need you to tell us your story succinctly. The more we understand your business, the better the application and the higher the prospect of you securing funding. So eligible costs, to try and just get a handle of in your mind to understand this. Here are some of the typical costs covered by the scheme. As I outlined, central to this grant are the costs of an external service provider who will build capability in your business. I would encourage you to talk to at least 2 or 3 providers in order to get a good fit for your company. Each provider may have a different approach, and it's really important that you get a good match and you're happy you can work with them over the next 12 months. Over time, in Enterprise Ireland, we've compiled a list of interested external service providers, which is on our website on the retail page. However, just bear in mind, this is not an approved suppliers list. You're not obligated to use anybody on this list, and the choice of provider is ultimately yours. As I said before, we'll cover 80% of the salary costs of an internal senior project champion, up to a maximum salary of €200 per day. This person is generally somebody who is senior in the company, who will work with the external provider to implement the project. We will allow costs for one internal champion only. In terms of the funding, this must be used to introduce what we call the additional functionality to your existing online presence. It can also include some in-house training on e-commerce or e-marketing type activities. Now, as important as the eligible costs, I think, for understanding are what are the ineligible costs. So we don't cover upgrades to your existing online channels that you needed to do anyway. We won't cover hardware or off-the-shelf software costs or subscriptions. The reason we don't cover these is that we want you to maximize the internal capability building in your company, and because otherwise all of the grant could go on one-off costs. We won't cover online advertising campaigns, for example, Google Ads, Facebook ads. Again, we want you to use this funding to build your online capability. And lastly, important to note that we can't cover costs that are incurred before the closing date of the call, which is 28th of September. Now, the evaluation process. An evaluation panel comprising staff members in Enterprise Ireland will review all applications, and we score all the proposals against these criteria. A representative from the Department of Business, Enterprise and Innovation will also be included in the evaluation process. Each project will be evaluated according to the following weightings, which differ slightly to those we applied in the previous call. So you can see the weightings on the slide there. Firstly, the quality of the proposal and the potential impact on the business has a weighting of 35%. Here we're looking at the objectives and credibility of the project. We will be looking at costs and the quality of the work plan and how it can be delivered in the 12-month timeframe. We'll also be trying to see how this plan can support future growth in the company. The second evaluation criteria is around the impact of proposed changes on the competitive position and viability of the company, and again weighted at 35%. Here we want to see how this project can improve the competitiveness position of the company and how it can support the viability of the company from the COVID crisis. The proposal should outline the expected impact on the company's potential to remain viable and achieve future growth in terms of, for example, job retention creation, sales opportunities, and here as well, you should also demonstrate the need for state support. The third criteria is around your ambition to internationalize the business, which we weight at 20%. For those of you who are familiar with the previous scheme, note here that the weighting for ambition to internationalize has increased from the last call from 10 to 20%. Here we're looking for a plan to internationalize and sell your products in export markets, to see what your ambition is around selling into these markets at present or in the future. Finally, your company's financial track record. Now, this is a standard practice for any Enterprise Ireland grant supports. We need to know that the company is not insolvent and that the support will have a good impact. So we are looking for an assessment of the company's trading history to date and the financial viability of the company. One of the conditions of your application that I cannot stress enough is that you provide statutory accounts which are less than 2 years old and which also must be received before the 3 p.m. on the closing date of the 28th of September. So moving on, we thought it would be useful to share with you some of our learnings from previous calls. Submitting your application is a two-stage process. Firstly, you submit the application itself. Then you get a bounce back email from Enterprise Ireland asking you to submit your accounts separately, but before the 3 p.m. deadline. So you need to remember that piece. Many companies got caught out with this deadline as they thought submitting the application was all that was required, and they missed the email asking for their accounts. So my strong advice is, please submit your application early enough and read the email correspondence that comes back from us. If you don't receive a bounce back email, you need to check your junk folder, as it may be in there. As Ross said, we would strongly recommend you don't leave it until the closing date to start or submit an application, as we all know technology can fail us when we need it most. This is a highly competitive scheme. The success rate in call 3 was approximately 50%. So if you are late or you don't satisfy the eligibility criteria, you will not be put through to the assessment and evaluation of your proposal stage. And just to remind you again, this is a competing call, which means you are in competition with each other for this finite fund. Only the strongest proposals will be approved. And if you don't already have internal expertise, we recommend you consider an internal champion as part of your costs, demonstrating that you are building the capability in the company and having continuity going forward may strengthen your proposal. If you don't meet the qualifying criteria, remember, we do check and your application will be rejected. Many companies didn't complete all of the sections in the application form. So my advice would be to take the option to download a PDF copy of the application from the system before you submit it and check over your application just to make sure you've included all the costs you want to apply for and you haven't left any sections blank. Other learnings that we would like to share with you today are that take some time in choosing your service provider. Some companies just didn't give enough planning or thought in choosing their service provider, and then as a result, many had to change consultant either before the project started or during, and all of this caused a lot of turmoil. Many companies put in costs, for example, Google and Facebook ads, which were discounted and ultimately led to them receiving a reduced grant. So, in summary, we need to know that your company has looked at and has a good understanding of the impact that increased e-commerce activities will have on the business. An attitude of build it and they will come is not really a viable strategy. The questions you want to ask are, is e-commerce right for you, or are you only going down this route because everyone else is? Websites need to be constantly promoted. Have you an understanding of the cost of acquiring and retaining customers and the internal skills and resources required to make it happen? This isn't a hit and run type of expenditure. This is funding for extra functionality, not just building a website and then letting it sit there. As I said, external service provider selection, very important. Make sure they have the skill set and the capacity, especially at the moment, that's required to make things happen. Finally, you can submit your application early. Please do, and make sure you read the emails we send back regarding submitting the statutory accounts. So just to finish up, as this is a competitive call, once the call opens, Enterprise Ireland staff cannot discuss individual applications. However, if you have specific queries, you should email them to the retail mailbox and we will answer them. It is best to email really, as with the volume of applications we're dealing with here, we have to prioritize queries emailed to the retail mailbox. So if you send in your query to an individual in Enterprise Ireland or come in through Enterprise Ireland's main switch numbers, you may even be delaying the time it takes to get your query answered, as ultimately whoever you give the query to will end up sending an email in to the retail team. And it can delay it if it has to go through other avenues. We have really tried to streamline, automate and tighten the parameters of the application to ensure we can process for you high volumes in as quick a turnaround time as possible. Like, we appreciate the enormously difficult trading environment you're struggling to survive in, and turnaround time for us to get back to you as quickly as possible, we need to keep the process tight. So if you can understand that. We now know there will be a permanent acceleration in online activity around the globe. So your drive to increase your online presence has never been more critical. And we really need you and want you to have a robust plan that makes this smart funding that is working to your best possible advantage. This webinar, together with the slides, will appear on the website in the next day or so. And we will also publish an FAQ in the next few days, and that will also be on the website. Reminder again that the key date, 28th of September, 3 p.m. But please act now to prepare, as a rushed application is not to your advantage. So thanks to Ross, or thanks for listening, and I'll hand you back now to Ross.
Thank you, Tracy. That was a great presentation. So we're going to move into the questions and answers phase of this. So I'd encourage you, if you haven't already gotten your questions in, now is the time to do so, and you'll see the functionality to do that on the dashboard that is down the right hand side of your screen. So if you open up that questions area, and you can type in your questions there. Now, as Tracy mentioned, if you do have very company specific questions, we may come back to you through the retail mailbox rather than right here and now. So I think my colleagues Owen, Mary and Amy are probably ready to go with questions. So I'm going to ask them to pop back up on screen as well, and I will hand you over to them to run the Q&A session. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Ross. I'll just take one or two of the questions, and then Owen will probably take a few as well. Actually, I'll ask Amy the first one. If approved for the online retail scheme previously, can you apply for this again? So do you want to take that one, Amy?
Yeah, perfect. Companies who were successful previously are eligible to apply under this call, provided that the project is completely finished, you've claimed all eligible costs, and you really need to demonstrate in this application how it's different than the previous project you've done.
Okay, thank you. And there's a question about the number. How many years accounts do you have to provide?
So all we need to see is the latest statutory accounts from the company, and they just can't be any more than 2 years old.
Okay, great. Owen, I have one for you. We're primarily a retail business, but have a restaurant and cafe, which is ancillary to the retail. Are we eligible to apply?
Yeah, that's an important question. One of the learnings from the past calls on this has been that there's lots of retail businesses that are part retail and part hospitality or part wholesale. So there's a lot of mixed businesses. And you will see that our eligibility criteria state that you have to have a retail store and derive the majority of your company's revenue from selling products directly to individual consumers. That questioner has said they're primarily a retail business. So I would imagine that more than 50% of their sales are coming from the retail side of the business, and the application form has a space in it where they can fill in those details, providing us with that breakdown, demonstrating their eligibility by showing, just putting in a line or two in the application form showing that the sales from the retail side of the business is more than from the restaurant or the cafe side.
Okay. There are a few questions around changes in eligibility criteria and scoring from the previous calls. And yes, there are some changes in both the eligibility criteria and in scoring. So you might just check the website, www.enterprise-ireland.com/retail for all of those details. I have a question here, which I'll take. How much of an existing online presence is required? The company should have an existing online presence. I think Tracy might have covered this before. Whether it's a website, Facebook page, Instagram account, or other social media. If you don't have an existing online presence, maybe have a look, go to your local enterprise office and have a look at the online trading voucher, which might be appropriate funding for you there. And we have a good few questions around, you know, platforms, and we have an existing e-commerce platform we want to upgrade. Can we submit an application? We won't cover the costs of the platform upgrade, purchasing a platform or upgrades to the platform. However, we will cover some implementation costs. So just make sure that that's clearly specified in your application. And also make sure that the application, you know, that you're proposing additional, you know, significant additional functionality to your online presence. There's one here about, is the scheme open to retail companies with a minimum of 10 employees? I suppose that's maybe around the full-time, part-time employees. Maybe you'd like to go through that, that mix?
Yeah. So you have to have, eligible companies need to have 10 or more employees on a full-time equivalent basis. So that means that, you know, we're conscious most retail businesses will have a mix of full-time and part-time staff. So what you'll see is on our website an example of how to combine those. So how to take your full-time staff and do a pro rata calculation on the part-time staff, which will give you your full-time equivalent number. So there's a worked example on the website on that. For companies that have less than 10 employees on a full-time equivalent basis, we'd encourage them to look at the local enterprise office trading online voucher, which they're likely to be eligible for.
Okay, thank you. I have a question here around the champion. We will cover the costs of a senior project champion, and that person is going to be the one that works with the external service provider. You're allowed one internal champion per company, with a maximum eligible salary is €1,000 per week or €200 a day, for a maximum of 25 weeks. Obviously, any claims for salary must be supported by wage slip and salary slips. And another thing worth noting is that the costs to support the salary or the internal champion must not exceed the external service provider costs. So that's worth noting. And only one internal champion is eligible for funding. Okay, question around why don't you fund advertising for paid advertising? Owen, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, so the direct funding of advertising campaigns is not eligible. So that can be, you know, Google AdWords or Facebook or Instagram or many other channels. I suppose the purpose and objective of this scheme is to embed the capability and digital skills within the company. So, for example, you know, training by your external service provider on how to manage and kind of set up some of those campaigns and you know, and develop a marketing strategy would be eligible, you know, as part of an overall e-commerce strategy. But the direct funding of pay-per-click campaigns or direct advertising is not eligible. So there's no point in putting in costs in your breakdown of activities and tasks for direct advertising, because we won't be able to include them in the overall grant total. However, if there's a training need there, around trying to embed capability within the company, we'd encourage applicants to kind of spell that out in the application and be really specific about what that kind of training need is, because that is likely to be eligible.
Okay. There's a question here. Do you think that estate agents who wish to sell property to consumers online will qualify? Unfortunately, estate agents, that would be seen as more of a service and wouldn't fall under the eligibility criteria of our of this particular grant. In terms of international, does this include post-Brexit UK and more especially Northern Ireland? I think we've always, Owen, you might be better at answering that one. Yeah,
I can answer that. Thanks, Mary. Yes.
I think we've just lost your volume, Owen.
Sorry, Mary. Sorry, can you hear me now? Apologies.
Yeah.
So in terms of does international include the UK? Yes, it does. Even before Brexit, I mean, the UK is obviously one of Ireland's biggest trading partners and the primary export market for many Irish-owned companies. And yes, it's absolutely a logical first step for companies to target Northern Ireland and the rest of the UK as their first export market. So.
Right. Okay. There's a question here about one of the slides said the funding can't go to upgrading a current channel, as that will happen anyway. If we have a website but we aren't doing e-commerce, but we need to, is that technically an upgrade to the current channel? I think implementing an e-commerce solution is going to be a lot more than an upgrade. It's a step change, so that would be eligible for this particular program. Okay, does the e-commerce partner agency have to be selected in advance of the application? I think that refers to the external service provider or the agency. And yes, you would have to identify an agency beforehand, because what we're looking for is the plan. We're working for the work plan that's going to be undertaken over the next 12 months. So we're looking at what that agency is going to do for you in terms of tasks and activities, number of days, cost per day. And this all has to be, it all comes down to when the evaluators are reading your application, we have to know your story. We have to understand what you're trying to do, and getting that breakdown will give us that. It will give us a better idea of actually what you're going to be doing over the next 12 months. However, in saying that, we do have a list of training providers or external service providers on our website. There is no obligation to use a service provider on that list. We strongly suggest that you vet any service provider that you're considering employing, before you actually go with them. Okay, let's see. Okay, do you consider a retailer proposing to join an online marketplace as part of their online strategy? For example, eBay, worthwhile online strategy, absolutely. And an application looking at an online marketplace would be valid. And I suppose, what we want to see again is how this fits into your overall plan and your whole e-commerce strategy. I'm not sure, is there any there that you can see anymore?
Yeah, so there's just one. So there's a question: are costs that are committed to but not incurred prior to the 28th of September allowable? So that was covered in Tracy's presentation. So any costs that are incurred before the call close date of the 28th of September are not allowable under this grant. Obviously, if a company is working on a plan over the next number of weeks and has committed and maybe signed a contract or whatever with a service provider, that's at your own risk. There's no guarantee that you'll be eligible or successful for funding, as it's a competitive process. So I think my advice to that person would be to put in their application if they have a plan in place already and they're looking at committing to expenditure, I'd advise them to get the application in as early as possible, and ultimately it'll only be expenditure that they incur after the call close date that will be possible to include in the grant if they're successful. So it's just another question. Well, I see it. So there's a question from Michelle, do the 10 full-time staff have to be from the retail section if there is a restaurant, shop and cafe? No, so the answer to that is no. So the company has to have more than 10 staff on a full-time equivalent basis, and more than 50% of the revenue needs to come from the retailing of products to consumers. So if you have more staff actually in the shop and the cafe, that's fine, as long as you're getting more than 50% of your revenue and can show that to us for a recent trading period from the retail side of your business. Hopefully that answers that question.
Oh, I have another one here, and I know we came across this in the last call. Our company is a group of companies in different locations. Are we better to apply as a group or as a single company from the group? And do we show all company accounts or just the company where the online business is based?
So, I mean, I suppose you need to apply under the name of, a company registered in Ireland with the company's registration office. And the application form requires you to give us details on the group structure and to make clear what other companies you're connected to. I think ultimately, as Tracy said in the presentation, it's the more we know about your business from reading your application form, the better we'll understand your proposal and the more likely you are to be successful for funding. So I can't really answer that question without more specific details, but I've maybe asked that company to email into retail@Enterprise Ireland the mailbox with the specifics, and we can have a look at their specific case and get back to them.
Okay, I have one here. If we are approved this funding, can a company later aspire to hire a digital manager type role under the Enterprise Ireland Key Manager Grant subsequently? This scheme is specifically not for Enterprise Ireland client companies. Enterprise Ireland client companies are not eligible to apply. If you are an Enterprise Ireland client company, what we suggest is you contact your development advisor, because there is some funding around this type of activity, but you are not and will not become a client of Enterprise Ireland under this scheme. So therefore, no, you would not be eligible for the EI Key Manager Grant. I think we might just take one more question. Would a company with 3 locations be considered a franchisee? I'm not sure, to be honest with you. I don't think, unless you are operating under a franchisee license with somebody, but certainly we've had companies that have 3 or 4 retail outlets, so and they would be eligible. So I think that's it. Do you see any more there?
There's one similar question, Mary, just that I see.
Okay.
So, and yeah, from Queevish says we have 7 stores and run our website from one store in particular. Therefore, do we submit accounts from that one specific store or for our overall company? So, I mean, I think if, yeah, look, that's reasonably common that you have multiple stores that are set up as their own individual companies. So I think, again, in your application form, there'll be an opportunity to, provide that kind of level of detail about the group structure and how companies are connected. But I think you should probably submit accounts for the overall company. And if you wanted to as well, you could submit accounts for the individual stores if they're set up as individual companies as well. But I think what we'd probably look to is if there's a consolidated set of accounts for the overall company, that would probably be the easiest for us to evaluate. Yep.
Okay, there's an interesting one here. Just, will the grant be given before the 28th of September if the application is successful? The expenditure, the closing date is the 28th of September. you have a year to incur that expenditure with your external service provider, and then you claim retrospectively. So there is quite a a robust claims process for this grant, and part of that claims process is that you would have to produce invoices and show the audit trail, both for your internal champion and your external service provider. So that's worth maybe having a check about, but we would expect that first you're allowed 2 claims for this grant as well, so it's going to be quite a while before you do have to incur the costs before you actually send in the claim.
I just
okay,
see.
when do we expect to? Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, Mary. I was gonna take 1 or 2 just that I can see coming in. The questions are still
You're coming
coming in, so
last
I might
minute.
as well keep trying to answer them. So there's a question here under criteria around viability and impact. Can the work plan include some relevant work by a business advisor? So I suppose typical in applications which have been successful under this scheme in the past, a characteristic of lots of the applications is that they have a mix of different service providers, because obviously to kind of do a kind of fully fledged e-commerce strategy, there'll be aspects of that are maybe research, there'll be aspects of it that are kind of strategy development and kind of financial in terms of payments and kind of stock management. There'll be aspects of that which are technical in terms of the website functionality, and there'll be aspects of that which are training in terms of kind of embedding some of those digital skills within the staff of the company, so that there's kind of on a long-term basis the company are able to operate their e-commerce strategy without ongoing support from a service provider. So I mean, there's no problem at all with having a mix of service providers with different capabilities and skills, delivering the relevant parts of your plan. That's to be encouraged. I mean, this is in your application form, we want you to put down the work plan that is the best fit for your company at your particular stage, and that's, for some, that's more heavily weighted towards kind of research. For others, it's more kind of technical or indeed marketing kind of strategy elements. So I think the answer to that question is yes, include the expertise that you think your business needs. And then there's just one more question which I might take. So there's a question from Jenny, who's asking, can the company director who works full-time count as one full-time staff member? Yes, so that's not a problem. I suppose it's we'll be looking at the number of staff that are detailed in your company accounts, and again in your application form there's plenty of space to provide details about who does what, and the ownership structure of the company.
Okay, thanks, Owen. I have one last question which I'm going to direct to Ross. It's a good crossover, put you under pressure, and it's, when do you expect to be able to announce who's successful?
Yeah, sure. So the process, as you know, goes through to the close date on the 28th of this month, and then following that there's a period of application scoring, eligibility checks, and then they have to go through to our investment committee for final sign off of those successful applicants. So it does depend somewhat in terms of the number of applications we get, the volume that we have to score, as that can hold things up. But essentially what we'd be aiming to do is have decisions cleared about between 3 and 4 weeks after the September 28th deadline. Shortly after that, you will then, if you're successful, get a notification that you have been successful in your application, and then a formal letter of offer will follow after that. But essentially you will be able to start incurring expenditure if you're successful approximately 4 weeks after the September 28th deadline. Okay, so guys, I want to say thanks so much to the team for their wonderful working through of questions there. As you can see, we have a highly experienced and very knowledgeable team working on this scheme. And if we didn't get any of your questions, of course, please go onto our website, check out our FAQs, but of course, feel free to engage directly with the team through the retail@enterprise-ireland.com mailbox. So finally, I'll just say thank you all for joining us this morning. We've had a large group of you who've been engaged for the last 55 minutes, and I'd like to wish you all the very best of luck with your applications. And remember, if there's any problems, we are here to help you with that. With that, I'll say goodbye. Thank you very much.